Present.
Present.
Here. Here. Here.
Here. Thank you. Next on the agenda, the approval of our last meeting's minutes. If there are no corrections, without objection, I ask that the Surface Transportation Funding Task Force minutes of September 14th, 2016 be approved as distributed.
Second.
So moved. All right, we have a very, very busy morning today, so we will be taking up today's meeting and breaking it into two study components per the legislation. For today's meeting, the first topic we will look at is highway patrol funding, and we will have multiple presentations on that, followed by regional state highway system planning and capacity needs for the next 20 years. So with that said, I would like to call Mike Hans to the podium. He is our House Transportation Infrastructure Research Analyst, and he will be giving an overview of the NCSL fiscal report on state highway patrol funding.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the task force, for the record, my name is Mike Hans, Legislative Research Analyst with the House Research Staff, and today I'll be presenting information from a report put together by the National Conference of State Legislatures Fiscal Affairs Program, titled State Highway Patrol Funding in Fiscal Year 2015. I've handed out copies of the presentation that should be in front of each of you. This report compares state highway patrol funding from 45 states, including Arizona. The funding sources are divided into 5 categories: state general fund, federal funds, state highway fund, special funds, and other sources. On average, between the 45 states, the general fund accounts for 46% of state highway patrol funding. Federal funds account for 5.6%. State highway funds account for 30.9%. Special funds account for 12.5%, and other sources account for 5.1%. By comparison, Arizona funds their state highway patrol 12.2% from the general fund, 8.9% from federal funds, 68% from the state highway fund, and 12.2% from other sources, with no money being used from special funds. Now move on to looking at each category individually. The report defines the general fund as covering all state appropriation expenditure and receipt transactions, except those which special constitutional or statutory requirements demand a separate funding account. The average state funds 46% of their state highway patrol through the general fund. As stated before, Arizona State Highway Patrol is funded 12.2% from the general fund. There are 8 states among the 45 that do not use any general fund money, and the states with the highest general fund percentages are Indiana, Iowa, New York, North Carolina, and Oregon. If you look at page 5 of your packets, it sorts every state by general fund percentage. Moving on to federal funding, the average state funds 5.6% of their state highway patrol through federal funding, as compared to 8.9% for Arizona. 4 states do not use any federal funding, and the 5 states with the highest federal funding percentage are South Dakota, Wisconsin, Idaho, Michigan, and Mississippi. Page 6 of your packet sorts every state by federal funding percentage. The report defines a state highway fund as a statutorily created restricted revenue fund reserved for specific purposes outlined in the state's constitution. It consists of revenues generated by a variety of sources. The name of the fund varies by state. The average state funds 30.9% of their state highway patrol through the state highway fund. Arizona funds 68% of state highway patrol through their state highway fund. 20 states do not use any state highway fund dollars in funding their state highway patrol, and the 5 states with the highest average of state highway funding are Florida, Wyoming, California, Nevada, and Texas. Moving on to special funds, the report defines special funds as accounting for the proceeds of specific revenue sources that are legally restricted to expenditures for specific purposes. The average state funds 12.5% of their state highway patrol through special funds. 13 states, including Arizona, do not use any special fund monies to fund their state highway patrol, and the states with the highest special fund percentage are Ohio, Washington, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Mississippi. Page 8 of your packet sorts every state by special fund percentage, and if you look at page 10, it includes an appendix from the report that breaks down the special funds in each individual state. And finally, the average state funds 5.1% of their state highway patrol through other sources. Arizona uses 12.2% of monies from other sources to fund highway patrol. 18 states do not use any monies from other sources, and the 5 states with the highest funding percentage from other sources are South Carolina, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Louisiana, and New Hampshire. Page 9 of your packets breaks down every state by funding percentage from other sources, and on page 13 it includes another appendix which breaks down the other sources from each individual state. And Mr. Chair, with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I'll start. I had one on the other sources slide. Arizona said 12.2%. What makes up those other sources?
One moment, sir. Mr. Chair, the report states that that comes from a variety of other fees and different sources like that. I can definitely look into that and get more specific numbers for you.
Any committee members have any questions?
Just given the variability in the special funds and the fact that you've got some states, we've got 0 right now coming from special funds, and we've got some states that have over 80%. What makes that up for other states?
Absolutely. Mr. Chair and Mr. Tully, if you look at page 10 from the packets that I handed out, it breaks down the special funds in each individual state. So California, for example, is the top reported one on that list. It has the state highway account, state transportation fund with $75 million, motor carrier safety improvement fund, the California motorist safety fund special deposit fund, the special deposit fund, and the California Peace Officer Memorial Foundation Fund.
Very helpful.
Mr. Chairman, I would just suggest too, for the first question that you had, I think the DPS presentation will get into
We'll
those
address that.
specific funds.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mike? Kevin?
Mike, are there limits on the amount of federal funding that can be used to fund highway patrol? In other words, could a state elect to if there was enough revenue with federal funds to fund the entire highway patrol with the federal funding?
Mr. Reagan and Mr. McCarthy, I'm not sure about any specific limits, but I'd be happy to look into that and get back to you.
I do. Mr. Chairman, and on the funding percentages now, how long have these particular percentages been in place, and when is the last time that the comparisons to other states have affected a change in the distribution or the allocations?
Mr. Chair and Ms. Pastrick, I believe the percentages would change year by year depending on the state budget. I'm not sure if there was any time where looking at other states has changed anything, but I'd be happy to look into that and get back to you.
I just find it interesting where the other funding sources come from. For example, the speed monitoring fund, and there's just really an assortment on page 10 and 11 of the many different states that have special funds that have been used. So it's just interesting to note, and maybe panel members would want to look at a particular fund in our state and say, have we ever thought of allocating a certain percentage? Just curious. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mike. Next, I'd like to call Philip Case, DPS Budget Director, to the podium to walk us through the Highway Patrol budget.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As you indicated, my name is Phil Case. I am the Budget Director at DPS. I am trying to bring up the presentation here. So let me get the slideshow going, and then I will get started. All right, sir. So we were informed, Mr. Chairman, members, about a week ago that you were desiring this presentation. We put it together fairly hurriedly. If there's any follow-up that's necessary, we'd be happy to do so with the committee or with staff. Our impression from the request was that we should focus on the appropriated budget of DPS. So I will not be covering federal funds today. We can always follow up with staff to cover that. Part of our rationale in doing so is that ultimately the state doesn't control the federal funds that we receive. They're used for specific purposes. In the Highway Patrol, it's primarily commercial vehicle enforcement, so it's not covering what we might consider the base Highway Patrol costs. We also receive some federal funding for DUI enforcement, some equipment, and for border security, primarily along I-8, I-10 in southern Arizona. So I can follow up with that if the committee desires. I thought it would be useful to go over what we call the program budget structure for the department. This is how the Joint Legislative Budget Committee and the Governor's Office of Strategic Planning and Budgeting view the department. We sort of view ourselves a little bit differently from internal perspective, so there are always those at least two different ways of looking at the department, the internal view and the external view. I thought it would be most useful to take the external view. This is more consistent with the information that you'll be getting from JLBC, for example. So they divide our department into 4 program areas: agency support, highway patrol, which I think will be the main focus of today's discussion, criminal investigations, and technical services. Within each of those programs, you can see here some of the activities that each program engages in. For example, in highway patrol, you have the basic patrol of the state highway system, also the enforcement of commercial vehicle laws and regulations, and then the Capitol Police function. The Capitol Police function is relatively new to DPS. We inherited that from the Department of Administration about 5-6 years ago. That function we placed in the Highway Patrol program because the Highway Patrol is the uniform presence of the agency. Detectives, for example, who work in CI are plainclothes. They don't wear the smokies and the tan uniform, whereas our Capitol Police do. So we place them in the uniform division of the department. That function, however, is not eligible for HERF or other related funding, and we do not, of course, allocate that funding to that purpose. So it's important for you to understand and for me to convey to you that the Highway Patrol program, despite its name, is not strictly what you may view as the patrol function, the Smokies, on the highway system. And we can talk about that more as questions arise and as we work through the presentation. This pie chart is a very brief graphical demonstration of the department's budget for the current fiscal year 2017. We were appropriated $292.6 million for the department's functioning, and you can see in the pie chart the breakdown by program. The Highway Patrol program has been allocated $111.7 million, which is about 38% of the department's appropriated budget. The note here references the constitutional provision which allows HERF and related funds to be used for DPS. And I do want to make the point, and again I'll delve into this a little bit more as we work through the presentation, that some of the HERF is spent outside of the Highway Patrol program. It's in support of the Highway Patrol function, but spent in the other programs. I'll give you just 2 examples. One is that the legislature has given DPS a special line item for our fuel budget. We consume $5 million or so of fuel every year. That makes sense. It's what we do. We patrol the highways. But that's in a special line item which resides in the agency support program. Most of the fuel expenditures for the Highway Patrol, but we spend vehicle fuel, of course, or consume it for other purposes as well. Our criminal investigations detectives drive vehicles, of course. And so we do allocate or track the expenditure in support of patrol and those expenditures that are not in support of the Highway Patrol. But those expenditures reside in the agency support program. Similarly, our dispatch function. We have 3 dispatch centers in Phoenix, Flagstaff, and Tucson. We have a statewide communication system that supports the Highway Patrol, other DPS functions, as well as functions of other state agencies. The primary user of dispatch and the radio system within DPS is the Highway Patrol. Other units utilize that functioning, but it's a Highway Patrol that's more constantly sort of on the mic and talking to dispatch, being dispatched to 911 calls and other calls for service and so forth. But those expenditures reside in the technical services program. So it is a little bit difficult to track total expenditures for the Highway Patrol. It is more than the $111.7 million that you see here for the Highway Patrol. We thought it would be useful to provide to the committee some indications of the Highway Patrol's activities in support of the statewide surface transportation system. We patrolled about 18.5 million miles in the most recent calendar year data that we have for 2015. We investigated more than 33,000 collisions, 256 of which were fatal. We conducted nearly 500,000 traffic stops. We made about 3,900 DUI arrests, about 7,600 other arrests, and we assisted motorists stranded on the side of the road almost to the tune of 100,000 times. The importance, of course, of assisting them is for their safety and for the smooth flow of traffic to get them off the highway system as soon as possible so that the traffic flows. We did all of this with about 560 troopers in calendar year 2015. This, I think, is beginning to get a little bit more into the meat of the presentation and to what it is that you're desiring. For the current fiscal year, again, $111.7 million has been allocated to the Highway Patrol, and these are the funding sources that DPS has allocated to that purpose. I noticed some differences between the percentages that staff was presenting and what you'll see here. I don't have the percentages reflected here, but obviously the general fund is only about 1%. I think the figure given from staff was significantly higher than that. There are a couple of reasons for that. I'm not sure what fiscal year staff was looking at. They may have been looking at the most recently completed fiscal year, which would be very logical for them to do. That's hard data that's finalized. They may have been looking at 2016. I thought it would be useful to use the current fiscal year. That's just a judgment call. You'll see differences as Ms. Pastrick was referencing or asking about the changes year to year of funding. It changes absolutely every year. I've been with DPS for 18 years, Mr. Chairman, members, and I call it the HERF roller coaster. If you look graphically at the percentage of HERF that the DPS total budget or the Highway Patrol budget constitutes, it is up and down. Usually it's tied to the economic condition of the state. When the state goes into recession, general fund is moved from DPS to other purposes and is replaced with HERF. Usually when a recovery occurs, that reverses. That hasn't happened so much in this recovery since the most recent recession, which is an interesting fact. But again, the HERF roller coaster, if I may use that term, is something that we've certainly seen at DPS over the years, and therefore the percentages change year to year. But this is how we have the patrol programs budget arrayed in the current year. The general fund, the state highway fund, which of course is, I call it an outgrowth of HERF, has the same basic funding sources as HERF. The Arizona Highway Patrol Fund, that fund receives revenue from 3 primary sources: the sale of surplus property at DPS, impound fees. When the department impounds vehicles, citizens can go through a hearing and have their car released for a fee of $150. We impound hundreds of vehicles a month for people driving on suspended licenses without insurance and for other purposes as indicated by law. So that generates $1 million to $2 million per year. The single largest source of revenue to the Highway Patrol Fund is insurance premium tax receipts on automobile insurance policies. We receive a portion of those revenues to that fund, which can be used for any DPS purpose, but is primarily used in the Highway Patrol Fund. The Safety Enforcement and Transportation Infrastructure Fund, that receives revenues that Mexican trucks pay upon entry to the United States or to allow entry to the United States. It's used for commercial vehicle enforcement within a certain number of miles of the border. Off the top of my head, I'm forgetting what that is, maybe 25 miles, but don't hold me to that. But for basically border truck enforcement to make sure that those trucks and others are operating safely and in accordance with laws and regulations. Public Safety Equipment Fund, which as the name suggests can only be used for equipment. It receives funding from 2 sources: enhanced DUI fines and a surcharge on criminal and civil fines and penalties. HERF, of course, which you're very familiar with. And then finally, the Risk Management Fund, which receives revenues from all state agencies who pay insurance premiums to the state. The state has a self-insurance program. We've been given a portion of this money, $1.3 million, for the Capitol Police function. So that is only spent on the Capitol Police. So this is the department's allocation of appropriated dollars for the Highway Patrol program for the current year. It does not, as mentioned earlier, reference non-appropriated dollars such as federal dollars, which would be the single largest source of non-appropriated dollars to the Highway Patrol. This is a bigger look, if you will, at how HERF is spent in DPS, or how we expect to spend it this year. So going back to the prior slide real quickly, you'll see that we've allocated almost $82 million of HERF to the Highway Patrol program, but our appropriation is $96 million. So where does the other money go? We have $4.1 million allocated to the agency support program, primarily for fuel and vehicle maintenance, but for some other support functions as well. Almost $10 million in the technical services program for communications, both our dispatch centers and to maintain the statewide radio system, but also for IT support to the Highway Patrol. Each patrol officer, each trooper now has a mobile data computer in their car, and to support the data that comes through to the troopers so that they can enforce state highway laws, for example, is an IT support function that's in part funded through HERF, records management, crime lab support, DUI analysis, for example. The crime lab itself, probably we spend $15 to $20 million. We only have a small portion of HERF allocated to the lab for the DUI work that they do in support of enforcing those traffic laws. And that concludes my program. I'm, of course, happy to answer any questions that you may have, and I'm available to follow up with staff on any follow-up questions that exist.
Thank you, Phil. Not a question, but you mentioned you could come back to the committee and provide us more information on federal funding. I'd certainly like to see that, and where federal funding comes from specifically. Are there formulas, matching fund type situations, grants? How is it calculated as it comes to us? Would be very helpful.
Mr. Chairman, I'll work with staff to arrange that.
Thank you. Alan.
Mr. Case, help me here just a second. So if I look at the page that has Highway Patrol program funding sourcing, right? You've got back one more, that one there. So I see a total appropriation, which is all state money, all appropriated money, right, for Highway Patrol of $111 million, right? If I back out of that risk management fund portion, that's equivalent to the Capitol Police.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGuire, that funds a portion of the Capitol Police.
So do you know about what the Capitol Police are?
I would say it's about $4 million. The other portion of that would largely come from the Highway Patrol Fund.
In addition to the 15, or a part of the 15?
It would be, Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGuire, it would be part of the 15. The Capitol Police budget is included in the $111.7 million here. Again, this is the program, the Highway Patrol program. It is not strictly the Highway Patrol function, right, if you will.
So if I take the 111 and I back out the $4 million, that gives me sort of the net Highway Patrol costs that are in the program. If I then turn the page and add the two items on that page on the top, okay, the agency support program and the technical services program, those are highway-related expenses not in the Highway Patrol program, right?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGuire, that is correct. I think that would fall somewhat short, though, of the total cost of the Highway Patrol function. And if I may, from time to time, based on requests from the Executive or Legislative Budget Office, my office has done an analysis of the total cost of the Highway Patrol function. The last time we were asked to do that, and we did the calculation, was for fiscal 2015, so a couple of years ago, and the calculation was $138 million. I can certainly do, and sort of expected that I might be asked through this process, to do an updated calculation of that for either 16 actuals or 17 budgeted funds to update that figure for the purposes of this committee or other purposes that the state might have.
But that 138 would essentially be, in the appropriate year, the 111 minus the 4, plus the 4, plus the 10.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGuire, something very close to that. I would just indicate that the 4 here and the 10 here.
Low.
Oh, correct. They're low. So there may be general fund dollars or other funds that are contributing toward supporting the highway patrol from these other programs.
Right, but there's no other big pieces.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGuire, that's correct. There aren't other big pieces. There may be some little pieces out there, but not big pieces that you're missing in that analysis.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Dave.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Case, first of all, thank you for all that DPS does, particularly in the commercial transportation industry. We are very grateful for the services of DPS. My question is, can you help us understand a little bit about how the budget, specifically regarding Highway Patrol, has changed annually over the last few years, and what are your anticipations of an annual rate of change in the coming years?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Williams, the patrol budget hasn't changed much in recent years due to state funding pressures. The biggest change has frankly been, unfortunately, in the mandatory funding of the retirement contributions. Those have risen dramatically in recent years, and essentially is DPS and the state have no options to pay that. So the state is left with two choices: either fund DPS for that increase or make DPS absorb the increase year to year. Fortunately, the state has been very supportive of the department and has funded those increases in recent years, so we have not had to absorb that. What that has done, however, has depressed the availability of resources for actual growth in the numbers of troopers or the improvement of equipment and technologies for the department. So in recent years, the only increases, and I'm going back maybe 5, well, actually more than that, probably about 8 years or so, there's been essentially no growth other than for the retirement increases. This year we were fortunate enough in the Highway Patrol to get a 3% pay adjustment. That was funded this year, but there's been, the staffing level has been more or less flat for that time period. So those are the current trends. You know, looking forward, we expect with the Loop 202 extension around South Mountain, which I believe is scheduled for completion at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020 perhaps, we will be looking for additional staffing for that. We believe we have many needs across the state for additional resources and staffing. We understand the position the state is in, and we can get by more or less with current resources, but looking forward, we will have that major addition. That is something we're going to have to plan for.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Case, could you give us a percentage of increase to expect over the next few years, or is that a...
Oh, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Williams, in terms of our request or what we might expect to be funded?
Yes.
Okay, it's very difficult. I mean, there are probably 3 different ways of looking at it, I might say. We have models that indicate the staffing levels that we think we should have, and we're very far from achieving those models of ideal staffing. So there is that out there, but we don't, frankly, expect to achieve those staffing levels in the near future. So I would sort of put that on the back burner. We have made our budget request to the governor's office, and that's been passed on to the legislature for 2018. I think that request is about for a 10% increase for the whole department. We did not ask for any additional troopers for 2018. So, optimistically, I would hope for maybe a 5% increase per year on average. Some years we might get more than that. Some years we might get less than that. But typically speaking, for just normal growth, traffic volumes, the additions of lane miles here and there, inflation, of course, which is both general inflation and then specific inflation, such as with the pension contribution requirements. I might hope for and think it might be a reasonable planning percentage to use about 5%.
Mr. Chairman,
Correct.
Mr. Case. So from your responses, it seems as though staffing levels haven't changed much, nor has funding changed, but has the allocation between funds changed significantly since, say, 2007, 2008 as the Great Recession occurred and that the legislature had to make budgetary adjustments that may have affected what sources, and whether sources today in 2007 are the ones that are being, that same allocation is being used today, or is it moving back towards what that was in 2007?
Right. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Newell?
Nula.
Forgive me. Mr. Nula. We can work with staff to look at the history of highway patrol funding in the state. DPS was created in 1969. Prior to that, the Highway Patrol was part of ADOT, and it was fully funded from the State Highway Fund until that point. From 69 till about the mid-90s, the Highway Patrol was also fully funded from the State Highway Fund or HERF. It was only in the mid-90s, as I think the pressures to build out the freeway system in Maricopa County and the highway system statewide came to bear, and perhaps the gas tax and other HERF revenues started to fall short of demand, that this discussion of moving DPS off of HERF and onto the general fund came to be. You may be aware that there's a statute, permanent statute right now, which limits the amount of HERF and state highway fund money that DPS shall receive or should receive each year to $10 million from each, a combined 20. In difficult times, the state has typically suspended that, not withstood that language, and given us more than the $10 million from each fund, as we currently receive from HERF. So going back to the time frame, Mr. Nula, Mr. Chairman, that you referenced, there hasn't been a whole lot of change from about 2007, 2008 to now. I guess at the very beginning of the Great Recession, there was a shift away from the general fund onto HERF. There have been a few fluctuations since then. I want to say in 2015 there was about a $30 million shift back to the general fund away from HERF, but we're still at very high levels relative to that permanent statute and relative to where we were prior to the Great Recession when it comes to the HERF funding.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Case, looking at how does the staffing levels for your department or for the Highway Patrol fare relative to, say, other states, or at least neighboring states, and particularly those maybe based on vehicle miles of road or some other pertinent statistic?
Right. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Nula, I haven't done a whole lot of research on that, but based on the research that I have done and what I've seen, our staffing levels are fairly comparable. We would like more so that we could do more, and we believe we could make the highways safer. But we recognize that the state has many demands on the tax dollar and fees and so forth. So I believe we're pretty much on par with our neighboring states, which are probably the best comparators. It's probably not a good comparison to compare us to East Coast states, given the geography and other differences that exist. But Colorado, Utah, New Mexico are good comparators. California, perhaps not so much. It's fairly unique as well. I believe that we're fairly on par with our neighboring states when it comes to staffing levels.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Case, last question I have is, one is I think you've already answered that, but perhaps the other one is, have you looked at other options outside of the current funding structure? So the earlier presentation had different approaches states have taken to fund their programs. And I'm not asking you to advocate for any of them, but have you looked at others and said this might have some traction or something that we could consider? That's where I'm headed.
Right. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Nula, we've not done a lot of work in that arena. Traditionally, we viewed our charge as trying to convey to the governor's office and the legislature what we believe the needs are to accomplish our mission, and have left the funding of that, the decision of how to fund those needs or what those funding levels should be up to the governor's office and the legislature. We're certainly aware of other initiatives. We've kicked ideas around in our head, but pretty much we've come up pretty empty. It's interesting that if you look at funding sources outside of the Highway Patrol and DPS, the general fund is the dominant funding source for us. We have, let me get you an exact figure here. From the general fund, we have $121.2 million of funding for all of DPS. So of that $292.6 million, $121.2 million, maybe 40% or so is general fund. 60% or so is state highway fund. 40% 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 or so is state highway fund. The HERF is the next largest funding source to DPS, which again is exclusively for highway patrol or highway patrol related costs. But then we have a whole category of surcharge revenue to DPS that comes to us through a dizzying array of funds. And what that is essentially is if I'm pulled over for speeding and I have to pay a $100 base fine, there are surcharges on top of that that make the total penalty that I have to pay roughly double that. And the $100 usually stays at the local level for the base fine. The additional $100 in surcharges goes to many, many different components of the criminal justice system at the state and local level. And DPS receives quite a bit of that. A lot of it goes towards our crime lab function. Other components of that go towards our criminal justice support functions. That's one thing that DPS does. We support the local PDs and sheriffs and the courts by housing, for example, and maintaining criminal information records and the like. So there's that whole surcharge arena. One concern we have there is that you can only increase the surcharge so much before you start seeing diminishing returns. People not having the ability to pay. So you may have larger penalties, but the ability to pay goes down, so there may be a net decrease or no increase to total revenues if that surcharge is adjusted. And we have the concern, I should say I personally have the concern, that we are at about the maximum surcharge level of roughly 100%. It depends because some are percentage-based, others are flat dollar-based per violation.
Thank you.
Julie?
And Mr. Chairman and Mr. Case, thanks. This is great for such short order. On the same page that Mr. McGuire was looking at the patrol program funding sources, the big dog is the $16 million on the Arizona Highway Patrol Fund, and you mentioned that the property sales, impound property, was around $1 million. So my question is on the insurance premium tax on the autos. How hard is that to regulate with the Department of Insurance, and does it provide a large amount of that $16 million?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Pastrick, it provides the bulk of that $16 million. As you indicated, the Department of Insurance administers the fund. We receive a transfer in late April, early May of each year to that fund. So it does present a bit of a cash flow problem for us. We don't have access to most of that money until toward the end of the fiscal year, but it is by far the majority of that revenue. The $1 to $2 million I was referencing earlier is for impound fees. When we impound a vehicle, a citizen can receive the vehicle back through a hearing, but there's a statutory fine of $150 that's paid for that. We do sell surplus department equipment, vehicles and office equipment, furniture, things of that nature, and the proceeds go to that fund. That may generate only $1 million or so a year. So the insurance premium tax on automobile insurance policies is definitely the largest portion of that. I can work with staff to break that out for you. It's in our budget request, so it's simply an issue of me getting that page and providing it to staff to share with you if you want to see the revenue breakdowns on any of these funds.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Kevin?
Sure, Mr. Case, do you have a rough estimate, or maybe since it's so important, might know it off the top of your head, what the FY16 HERF number would be? 81.9.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McCarthy, I'm sorry, the appropriation to DPS?
Correct.
Yes. I have the JLBC's appropriations report here, so I can find it. It was $96.4 million. So essentially the same amount as in the current year, $400,000 or so more in actuality. So comparing it to this figure here, $96 million this year. Last year was $96.4 million.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Case, first of all, I would echo Mr. Williams' comments. DPS does an amazing job for the state. So first off, unbelievable job for the motoring public. There's been a premium tax change from an insurance perspective from 2% with a ratcheting down coming up. What is the impact right now on DPS in coming years?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tully, that will not affect DPS. Our portion of the insurance premium tax is a dedicated amount. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what it is. It's fairly small, maybe 0.2%, something like that, and it was not affected by that legislation. But thank you for asking.
So second question, so your number is actually fixed at a fixed dollar amount?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tully, no, it's a fixed tax or charge of some tenths of a percentage. So as the value of insurance policies go up, the collections go up. As they go down, as happened during the recession when people stopped buying cars, in the main, the revenues did go down then, but have been growing fairly at healthy rates in recent years.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Case.
You're welcome, sir. Thank you.
Next up will be our turn here on public testimony. Before we take any public testimony, I'd like to remind everybody that per open meeting laws, all public testimony must pertain to the topic at hand. So for this segment, we would be asking for anybody with public testimony related to highway patrol funding. As a side note, I also encourage the public, everybody, every group, anyone interested to please submit public correspondence on any of the issues that we are going to address. And we have tasked Caitlin Neff, our Senate research analyst, to receive all public correspondence. She's sitting in front of us here today, and her contact information is available after the meeting today. With that said, I don't see anybody registered to speak, so I would ask that if anybody would like to come forward and speak from the public, please do so now. Okay. Next up, committee discussion on the testimony we heard. If anybody would like to make some comments for the record. Al.
Mr. Chairman, at the very back of the NCSL draft report that was sent out, there's an appendix that walks through a bunch of recent legislation and state actions. Listed in that list is a bunch of different alternative ways to come up with funding. Most notably, the first one listed is for Arizona, and it references the proposed increase in the motor vehicle registration fee that Governor Ducey included in his fiscal year 2016 budget. The notes say that the increase was to $15. And if my memory serves me right, there's a range of fees, but they're about $8. They range, I think, from about $5 to $9. But I think the average is about $8. So that was a $7 increase, and it would generate $65 million in dedicated revenue for the Arizona Highway Patrol. I'd really appreciate if maybe staff or JLBC or somebody could check those numbers, because, for example, an $8 registration fee going to $15 is a big percentage, but not a very big dollar impact. If it generates $65 million, if you took it up to $20 or $22, you generate almost the entire funding of all of the portions of the Highway Patrol in the program and outside the program pretty easily. Now, technically, those are still HERF monies, which is a little bit inconsistent with our charge, but it certainly would eliminate the problem, and it would look a lot like the insurance premium allocation now, which would say whatever would be $15 of the registration fee every year shall be dedicated to funding the Highway Patrol and its related costs. But a couple of those examples would be very useful if we could generate a couple of those. And I'm sure between Mr. Case and the staff we can do that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we're going to move on to regional state highway system and highway capacity needs. We have a long list of presenters today, starting with if Eric Anderson would please come to the podium. Eric is the Maricopa Association of Governments Transportation Director.
I thought he was just the entire association, actually.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, very nice to be here. I am Eric Anderson, Transportation Director for the Maricopa Association of Governments. One of the things I'd like to just start with thanking DPS also, because DPS plays a major role in how we operate the regional freeway system here in the Valley. And DPS has made great strides in improving their response times. And about a year and a half ago, we actually flexed some money to ADOT to have DPS offers co-locate within the ADOT Traffic Management Center. It's made a big difference in terms of improved response time. That's really important because the more quickly we can get incidents off the freeway system, we can restore good traffic flow. And so we really think that's a very important program to keep in mind. What I'd like to share with you today is a little overview on our needs here in the Valley, on the regional highway and freeway system here, talk a little bit about transit and arterial streets, and then talk about funding a little bit also. So what I'd like to start with, this is a survey that the app Waze did, I think about a year and a half ago now, which rated Phoenix as the best driving experience in the world. And this didn't come by accident. In fact, we have spent a lot of regional money as well as state money to improve our highway system here in Maricopa County. And so the voters in 1985 passed one of the first half-cent sales tax dedicated to transportation nationally. And then the voters approved an extension of that tax in 2004, what we call Proposition 400. So once again, we've been at this for a long time. We continue to make progress, but once again, we always need more. So one of the key ingredients to all this is funding. And so these are charts based on estimated revenues for fiscal year 2017. Total major sources of transportation revenue into Maricopa County, about $1.568 billion. But important to note on that, on the pie chart on the left-hand side, that bright green is the dedicated local and regional funds that come from either our regional half-cent sales tax, which represents about $392 million of that, as well as dedicated local taxes dedicated to transportation. Of that almost $750 million, about a third of that goes into the state highway system. That's largely a result of the half-cent sales tax here in Maricopa. About 6.5%. 6.5% goes into the street program, and a big share of that also goes into regional and local transit services here in the Valley. So this is where we stand on Proposition 400. I didn't show all the projects we completed to date. When I say we, I include the Arizona Department of Transportation, which implements the highway program here in this region. But this is where we stand right now. We just went through an exercise last week, to add $1.25 billion of projects back into the program. This is a result of some fairly major cost savings we have on a lot of projects around the Valley, and improved revenue outlook, as well as some very intense scrutiny of projects that are still on the books. Scrub those projects down to make sure they're the most cost-effective projects that we can have. There's about $1.77 billion under construction. The large part of that is the South Mountain Freeway project, which started construction last week. It's a $916 million guaranteed maximum price contract using a very innovative P3 process, design, build, maintain. The development team has the responsibility of doing basic maintenance on that highway for the next 30 years also. So that's a large part of that. In addition, we have about $2.3 billion programmed between now and 2025 for construction. The major part of that, about $1.4 billion, is allocated to improvements on I-10 and I-17. Note that those are the part of the federal interstate system, but we are putting substantial regional funding on the interstate system here in this region. And then we continue to have about $3.9 billion of deferred projects. The major project that's being deferred, continued to be deferred, is State Route 30 in the southwest part of the Valley. That's a $1.6 billion project, so we really would like to get that funded. We're looking at alternative ways of getting that constructed today. So in addition to those that are part of our plan, this is our long-range map. And so as we look out in the future, we do our regional transportation plan goes out through 2035 today. But obviously we have to look beyond that right now. We've identified about $8.7 billion of other projects that are needed at some point in the future. Once again, this is only on the highway side. So rather than going through all of these projects, just picking out some of the major ones, we have Interstate 11 or the Hassayampa Freeway out in the far west valley. We have the North-South Freeway in Pinal County, as well as State Route 24, which is the line out in Pinal County also. Those are all new freeway projects that need to be built at some point in the future based on our growth projections. So just to summarize the $8.7 billion, you'll see about $5.5 billion of that is in new freeway corridors, and you'll see the list of freeway corridors there. In addition, there's a need to add additional capacity around the system. Today, about $2 billion, a little less than $2 billion of improvements on the existing systems that we have in place today. Improvements on what are called direct HOV connector ramps and other service interchange improvements around the system, about $300 million. Improvements on Grand Avenue. We finished a major study a couple years ago, identified how we can improve the traffic flows on Grand Avenue by doing more of the grade-separated crossings, much as we see under construction today at Bell Road and Grand Avenue. That alone is about a $50 million project, and that is a regionally funded project also. And then the operations and maintenance cost that goes along with this, about $500 million. So I'm going to talk about operations and maintenance now on the state highway system. These are some numbers we did a couple years ago. Didn't have a chance to really update a lot of these figures, but I think in general it gives you an idea of the order of magnitude. Today, we think that the optimal level of operations and maintenance on the state highway system in this region should be about $81 million, a little shy of $81 million. And that includes about $67 million on freeways and $13 million on highways. Highways include like State Route 87, the Beeline Highway to Payson. Grand Avenue is still a state highway, not a freeway, and so that's the category there in the purple there, 13.4 million. So right now we're spending about $50 million. We meaning ADOT and MAG. MAG is funding about $10 million a year in maintenance costs for the highway system today. That comes directly out of the half-cent sales tax. So if you look at the gap between what's being spent today and the optimal level of operations and maintenance funding, it's about a $30 million gap there. And you'll see some of the items there that are part of that total. So with the new freeways in place and these new improvements, you'll see with the opening of Loop 303, which is now open to traffic, it's a 40-mile facility. Loop 202, South Mountain Freeway, 22 additional miles, which obviously impact both DPS as well as ADOT's maintenance and operations costs. Total through 2040, about $2.4 billion in cumulative costs to operate and maintain the system here in Maricopa County. Some big budget items in addition to this. The quiet pavement, this is the rubberized asphalt that ADOT uses to reduce the noise generation on the freeways. That has to be reapplied every 8 to 10 years around the system. The Stack interchange, which was the first big system-to-system interchange built in the valley, is going to need to have major rehab sometime between now and 2040. Deck Park tunnel maintenance continues to be an issue, and ADOT really does need to replace pumps, especially on I-17. Those pumps, they actually have to customize some parts because off-the-shelf parts aren't available for some of the pumps that operate the drainage system on the freeway. That's about $1 billion package right there on those items too. So just in summary, this is a summary of the needs that I've gone through, about $15.6 billion, including the $3.9 billion that were deferred out of Prop 400, the illustrative projects that are going to be needed at some point in the future, plus the O&M costs, and then these kind of one-off large maintenance projects, so about $15.6 billion. So on the transit side, apologize, I keep hitting something behind me here. On the transit side, transit is largely funded at the regional local level. In fact, the state of Arizona doesn't provide any transit dollars at all. But just to give you an idea of the order of magnitude we're looking at, these are 3 different funding scenarios. We're actually going through and updating this now, but transit is very difficult to say here's what we need, because transit can be a very high level of investment. In some areas have made a big commitment to that. We've been more modest in our investment levels. And so these investment levels you see on this chart are really tied to what other areas are doing now. We're coming back and doing kind of a base level analysis now about what the core transit system should be to serve the 4.5 million people that live here in the region. So just to summarize needs very quickly, I didn't really talk about the regional arterials. That's really big guess on the arterial side. I think you'll have some presentations later during your sessions specifically talking about local road needs. But it's very important that the local road maintenance needs are recognized by this committee. That's a very important funding. About 60% of the traffic here in Maricopa County is carried on the arterial street system, not on the freeways. And so the arterial system is a very important part of our regional transportation system too. So let's talk about funding a little bit, a little game. What's happened since 1991? New home prices have gone up 139%. These are national numbers. Price of a Honda Accord's gone up 87%. Median household income's gone up 87% too, or a little over 87%. Good news, and in fact, we saw some healthy average household income growth this year for the first time in a number of years. Consumer Price Index, general rate of inflation, gone up 76%. The gas tax hasn't changed. We're still at 18 cents a gallon. And so, once again, in the context of what's happened over the last 25 years, gas tax has been left at 18 cents. And so, regions like ours, cities like Phoenix or Tempe or Glendale have taken the initiative to raise their own money because they have to maintain their own roads too. And so we're getting away from the user pay concept in terms of our transportation system, and I think we kind of need to get back there too. So just a little nudge. So I think Senator Worsley shared this chart with you. We did this a few years ago. The numbers are still kind of order of magnitude. There's a whole variety of things you can do to increase revenues. In terms of funding DPS, Mr. McGuire mentioned the proposed increase that Governor Ducey had. I think at $20 increase in the registration fee, I think you fully cover the traffic enforcement component of the DPS. So California dedicates part of their registration fee to their highway patrol function, and I think those kind of dedicated sources are really good to identify and put into statute. So just, I categorize these revenue options as kind of fuel tax related. We know the fuel taxes are a declining source of revenue as cars become more efficient. We did a quick calculation based on the proposed increases in the corporate average fuel economy rates, which are supposed to go to about 56 miles per gallon by 2025. That alone, if you take account of the fact that the fleet only turns over about 8% a year, that's a 30% reduction in fuel tax revenues alone. And that's only going to grow over time. So we have to do something to change the way that we collect those kind of revenues. And obviously we have a lot of non-fossil fueled vehicles that don't pay the fuel tax. So that also needs to be addressed. Sales tax options in this region, our sales tax has been the big driver in terms of revenue generation and provides a lot of funding on these important transportation projects. Sales tax on fuel is done in some other states, something that you might want to look at. Also, other options, license fees, registration fees, property tax, sin taxes. These are all sources of revenue that are used for transportation in one way or another really across the country. So, Mr. Chairman, that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Any questions? Dave.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Anderson, question for you on some of the new builds. The commercial transportation industry has long been adverse to tolls for various reasons, market reasons as well as efficiencies. Is MAG considering tolling as an option for any of these projects?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Williams, at this point in time, MAG does not have a position on tolling. We do understand that ADOT is looking at a potential tolling option for State Route 30 in the Southwest Valley. They're starting the traffic and revenue analysis today. In this region, we've taken a position that our transportation systems, and in particular our highway system, is a community asset and really should be paid for out of general tax revenues because it's really difficult to have a strict user pay. Despite my prior comment about we need to get back to more user pay, I think in terms of the infrastructure itself, I think it's really important that these freeways operate in a good manner. Tolling, I think most of the toll road projects around the United States requires a significant amount of public revenue or public investment also, up to the tune of maybe half of the project still has to come from public revenues.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Anderson, one other comment, I guess. You had made the comment that our fuel tax revenues are a declining source and that there's an increase in non-fossil fuel related activity. That's a little bit frustrating for me in that for the last 15 years we've heard that same argument against moving the fuel tax, and yet we've lost maybe 15 years worth of potential progress because of that line of thinking. Is MAG pushing that as a viable option to increase the fuel tax and gain the political leverage needed to move that along?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Williams, just a clarification. Precisely, what are you asking? Again, increasing the gas tax?
Increasing the gas tax, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Williams, in fact, we've had a number of discussions in our policy committees about increasing the gas tax. And in my mind, I think that it is a source of revenue. It's a major source of revenue now for the Arizona Highway User Revenue Fund. Gas and used fuel comprise over half of the Highway User Revenue Fund today. We would think that a 10-cent a gallon increase in the gas tax, as an example, it's an average consumer would be about $5 a month, would do a great deal in restoring some of the balance back into the Arizona Highway User Revenue Fund. That's a short-term fix, and I think longer term, both nationally and a number of states are looking at alternatives to the fuel tax. The vehicle miles tax, the VMT tax, has been talked about in a number of states. In fact, Oregon's done a number of pilot studies on implementing a VMT tax as opposed to a fuel tax. And so what's the beauty about a VMT tax is that it hits everybody. So if you have a Tesla that's electrically powered, you're going to pay the same rate as somebody who has a car, a fossil fuel car. So long term, we think that's probably a better solution, but that has a lot of R&D that needs to go into it to really make it happen at this point.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Anderson, I know Arizona has had experience with VMT in the past, and do you recount the amount of I'll call it cheating that occurred, and how that might have an impact on the effectiveness of such a solution.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Williams, yes, in fact, I worked with Dave Barry on when the weight distance tax was taken off the books here and replaced by the higher use fuel tax on heavy trucks. That's why we have a 26 cent a gallon use fuel tax on heavy trucks versus the 18 cents. So, in fact, at that time, and I think it was in the early 90s, collection of that tax was extremely difficult, but technology really, I think, has come in and can solve that issue today. And so I think that although the solution was fraught with issues then because it depended on basically self-reporting, technology today can overcome those kind of issues.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Eric, thanks for the presentation. Thanks for coming today. A couple of questions. The first one is, when I look at these issues as an economist or somebody that advises on economic development, a lot of these issues are very easy to understand. There's a tight tie between transportation infrastructure and other infrastructure and how we can grow. And you've seen the math before. Very modest increases in the rate of growth, if we do all these things well, could pay for a lot of these types of projects. That's a sale after the fact. You still have to put it in the ground and then wait for these benefits to happen. So from the economic side, it's easy. From the politics side and the public policy side, whenever you talk about a tax increase, especially when we're talking about something, even though there could be great gains and there'll have to be messaging involved, there's opportunity costs, there's unintended consequences, things like that. Is there anything that we need to be aware of as we're talking about these different taxes? Because we're talking about tax increases. It's not, here's a list of what we would tax and here's our complementary list of what we're going to cut. If we're going to be looking at additional funding and there's solid justification for these types of investment to help build the economy, are there unintended consequences that could happen if it's not done properly? Because this isn't a completely new program. There's already existing taxes in place for different programs, regional basis, how it could impact cities. Any just high-level comments that you can think of that maybe we should be thinking about over the next several weeks?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Rounds, certainly there are a number of things. I think a lot of people look at the sales tax because the 1 cent sales tax statewide raises about $1 billion. So that, boy, you push that button and that sounds like a great fix, right? Well, the sales tax in many cities, towns and cities around Arizona are already over 10%. And I don't think there's any magic line that says you can't go above a certain amount. But I do think that when you get sales taxes in the 10% plus range, I think it really becomes problematic for our competitiveness as a state. And so that's something we always have to keep in mind. Secondly, I think that in this region we have the city of Phoenix, for example, has a 7/10 sales tax for transportation in place. They passed that last August. We have a half-cent sales tax in addition in Maricopa County to fund transportation. And so one of the concerns that we would have is that you need to make sure that people understand what you're doing, how that money is going to be applied, and that people don't say, well, we've already fixed that problem. Because once again, if you have a statewide solution and say hypothetically you said, well, this is all going into the state highway system, well, that doesn't do anything for the local streets, roads and streets either. And so at some point that has to be addressed. And so you'll have the situation that voters will say, well, I thought that was already taken care of. And so I think it's very important that you be very clear about what the revenue source you're talking about is going to be, why it's the right source or mix of sources of revenue, and how those revenues are going to be applied around the state. It's operations and maintenance. You know, operations and maintenance is really key. Ask people in Pima County and Tucson that they've been struggling trying to maintain their streets, and I think they're in a point now that it really is a negative from an economic development perspective. And so, you know, street maintenance isn't sexy, quite frankly, as opposed to opening a new project, whether it's a new freeway or a new light rail route, whatever. But it's fundamentally important to the state.
Any other questions?
Just one quick question. Eric, have you looked at like a regional development fee? You know, we do development fees at the local level for obviously local streets, but also for arterials on a proportionate basis. There was some discussion, golly, I don't know, quite a while ago, a couple of governors ago, about potentially doing that at the state or regional level to deal with highways. So taking it beyond the next step of arterials to highways. So a major residential development gets built adjacent to a highway. They pay for interchange, but they add 20% traffic to the mainstream flow.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGuire, we certainly have talked about that. We think that is a solution that should have been in place for decades here in the Valley. And in fact, one of the performance audits that was done on the Regional Freeway Program here in 1991 had 75 or so recommendations. One of the recommendations was for Arizona to implement a before and after appraisal method, which basically would assign part of the value of these major public sector infrastructure projects to the adjacent landowners. And so, and that was the only recommendation that didn't make it. And there was obviously a lot of opposition from the development community at that time. This was back in 1992. So, in fact, we made attempts at doing that. People talk about tax increment financing, which the legislature has not embraced in the past. Where you do, it allows the public sector to capture part of that increase in value that's directly attributable to that project and return part of that value back to the taxpayers. But we can't do that in Arizona. And so that's a real problem. That's something that should be addressed, in my mind.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you.
Would John, hopefully I'll pronounce this properly, John Lusatos, PEMA Association of Governments Transportation Planning Director.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the task force. Again, for the record, my name is John Leosatos. I'm the Transportation Planning Director for the PEMA Association of Governments. We are the Metropolitan Planning Organization for Pima County. And our planning boundary is all of the county. Additionally, PAG contracts with the Regional Transportation Authority of Pima County, or the RTA, to administer administrative and planning services. This arrangement allows for greater efficiencies and removes the duplication of effort than if we were two separate agencies. Oh, this advanced for me. I believe at your last meeting you had already talked about things like this, but we wanted to show you this slide because we think it's actually helps folks who don't have as much knowledge of the subject as you all do with sort of understanding some of the things that we're dealing with. But so since you already understand the economic future of our state is tied to doing something more productive than the solution that we had back from 1993, we're going to concentrate our comments today on the maintenance and needs of our region, but we're going to take a little different tack than Mr. Anderson in that we're going to sort of put ourselves in contacts with the rest of the state because really, quite frankly, the state is very diverse and we have a lot of different needs in southern Arizona versus Maricopa County versus greater Arizona. I think when they showed the top 10 driving experiences in the whole world, I don't think anything in southern Arizona made the top 10. So we have a little bit of a different experience down there than you here in Maricopa County. So again, just to sort of highlight some of the differences, we've got a lot of different size counties, which then leads to you've got a lot of different population densities within the region. Obviously, Maricopa County's got a lot of folks. Pima County, we're in the middle. But then again, you've got some other counties that have some different population densities, which lends themselves to the different solutions. Maybe transit's not the same sort of solution as looking at arterials or other sorts of roadways. And again, going into the incorporated population, Maricopa County, 93% of that population is within an incorporated city or town. Pima County, 64%, while something like Apache County is only 14%. So again, if you're looking at solutions, maybe one size doesn't fit all. Vehicle miles traveled, again, you can see in La Paz County, you've got to drive much farther to get to where you want to go. Maricopa County, Pima County, we've got a little more density, so you don't have to quite drive as far. But that being said, hours of delay per year per commuter, you can see Maricopa County and Pima County, we're spending a lot more time kind of stuck in traffic or in congestion. I also wanted to talk about limited freeways, in that, you know, Eric can kind of get up and talk about all the different freeways that you have. In Pima County, we only really have I-10, I-19, so we're very limited on that. So it's a different picture for us, and as you can see, 75% of our trips occur on the arterial roadways. So it's very important for us to improve our mobility, that we focus not only on the freeways, but on the arterial streets as well. So we're hoping that solutions you come up with will address that as well. In 2006, the PAG region passed a half-cent excise tax and accompanying transportation plan, and both of them had to pass for the tax to be collected and the plan to be implemented. The tax can only be spent with things that are consistent with the plan, and it is important to stress that the RTA plan did not include any of the any maintenance. It was intended to accelerate arterial widenings within the region and help mobility. So not only did the plan include arterial widenings on the for the local streets, but it also accelerated projects on the state system adjacent to I-10 or including I-10 and I-19, such as frontage roads, traffic interchanges, and grade-separated rail crossings. When that RTA plan was developed in 2006, our regional focus was easing congestion on the region. In 2008, when the recession hit, our jurisdictional partners were faced with some very difficult funding decisions. Please remember that the RTA enabling legislation for Pima County is different than the half-cent enabling legislation in Maricopa County. There are 5-year periods in which projects need to start. So our local jurisdictions were faced with, if they didn't commit to getting the RTA project started on time, they risked not having the RTA continue. So it's like if you're in business and you're selling ice cream and your freezer breaks, if you don't fix that freezer, you're not getting money into the future. So as tough as it was for them to say, hey, we've got to make sure we get the resources to do those projects, they had to commit to that, and they had to make sure that the projects were delivered on time. But with that meant something else had to sort of to go. And so while at the same time they were based on some tough budget decisions on core services, they needed to keep that promise, and that's when I think Eric had mentioned perhaps some of the surface streets are not in the best condition in Tucson and Pima County as they are in other parts of the state. I just want to point out real quickly on this particular chart, it's not quite as fancy as the pie chart that Eric used, but it kind of shows you the level of funding that our RTA has brought to our regional picture. When we're looking at state and funding sources, you see that sort of on the bottom. Once we enacted our own RTA and we had our own self-help where we could start leveraging those RTA dollars against federal sources and using the state funding sources for things that made the most sense to do it, because there's different funding rules for different funding sources. So if you don't have any of your own local money, well, maybe use state stuff that you'd rather not, but that's the best. Or federal funding sources you really don't want to use unless you have to because of all the rules that are tied to it, but if it's the only game in town that you use it. Having the RTA allowed us that flexibility to start matching the appropriate funds for the appropriate types of projects, and really was a game changer for us in the region to move forward. There we go. Over the past 6 years, pavement preservation has become a huge issue for our region and has prompted discussion on the need for additional transportation funding, not only to improve the overall condition of the network, but to improve the additional funding for capacity increasing projects that are needed for economic development. To put some numbers to the size of our funding gap in Pima County, the recent PAG Long-Range Transportation Plan, our 2045 Regional Mobility Accessibility Plan, identified $29 billion in regional needs over the next 30 years. At the same time, we could only identify about $13.8 billion in reasonably expected funding. That leaves about a $15.2 billion funding gap. This funding shortfall extends also to our limited state highway system, which requires ADOT to shift resources towards maintenance and preservation, thereby delaying the start of needed capital improvements. In 2014, PAG created the Economic Vitality Advisory Committee, or EVAC, which was patterned after MAG's economic committee that they had started, I believe, a few years before. This committee within PAG was formed to strengthen the connection between transportation and economic competitiveness of the region. Our EVAC memberships include, and you can see for yourself, but I want to highlight that we have we have all of our jurisdictional partners. We have higher institutions of learning, ASU, we have the local folk that are based in the Pima County come to these meetings, U of A, Pima Community College. We have business group, the Tucson Hispanic Chamber, the Tucson Metropolitan Chamber, Southern Arizona Leadership, we have the Sonoran Institute, Metropolitan Pima Alliance, and then we have state agencies so we get a complete picture of everything that needs to move forward. Arizona Commerce Authority, ADOT, Arizona-Mexico Commission, and actually the Southern Arizona representative of the governor's office. Additionally, we have MAG makes the trip down most of the time, but sometimes they just call him. So again, we're trying to look at what the whole picture is, not just treat Tucson as our own economy, rather we're the Sun Corridor. We're a state economy, whether we like it or not. We have to start thinking that way. So we try to coordinate whenever we can, which is also in addition to MAG, we have the Consulate for Mexico that's stationed in Tucson come to the meetings as well. And actually he's very active, as well as we have Union Pacific join us as well. So the EVAC came together and they determined that the PAG region needed to improve in two key areas. Strengthening our relationship with Mexico is one, but the other was improving the general public's awareness of how transportation is paid for and the role it plays in economic well-being of the community. In 2016, earlier this year, the EVAC developed a transportation funding white paper that outlined some of the options to Southern Arizona. The white paper was adopted by the PAG Regional Council in April 28th of 2016. So you all should have received a copy of the white paper before you came. We brought some extra copies. They're selling like hotcakes on eBay. There we go. So while we were developing the white paper, and I think this gets to some of the discussion that has already occurred, we discussed state options as well as regional options, such as increasing the gas tax was included in the white paper. However, we did not include a state sales tax for transportation in the paper as an option, because sales tax is a good regional tool. It may not work necessarily in all regions, and for that reason, especially since some incorporated areas of the state are already pushing up close to 11%. So we thought, again, if we say, well, this is the one-size-fits-all sort of solution, it definitely has some consequences in parts of the state where that additional increase could do some more harm than good. So we believe it's a good regional tool, but not necessarily one that would be appropriate statewide. So in closing, what we really want to stress is to advocate for regional solutions and having enabling legislation for some more regional solutions. I mean, it would be great if the state moved towards a statewide solution, and we would encourage you to still make that recommendation. However, Phoenix, Tucson, Yuma, Flagstaff, Prescott, and even Greater Arizona all have different needs, and we're all at different places on our ability to generate funding for self-help. Beyond a recommendation for statewide solutions, we would also encourage you to recommend a robust set of tools for regional self-help, such as allowing voters the option of increasing our RTA tax in Pima County, for an example. Regional options like this can fill the gap regions where HERF revenues are not meeting the need. It also gives the voters of the region the option to tax themselves based on their regional priorities. We know that there are varying needs around the state, and we know there's not a consensus of a political viewpoint that favors statewide solutions, and especially solutions that may be perceived as an increase in taxes. A recommendation that allows for greater regional options shifts the decision-making process to those leaders who may not embrace increasing taxes, but who understand that for his or her particular region, that might be the best option to improve their constituents' way of life. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Committee members with questions?
Mr. Chairman, John, have you looked at how much you would have to increase your local excise tax to fund your needs?
I don't believe we've come up with sort of the, Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGuire, I do not believe we've gone back to sort of say, here's what all our needs are, and then this is how we would do that. And quite frankly, I think there's nothing, there's sort of the 15.9 billion, what's the time frame? Do you need to do, if you want to do that all in 1 year, then obviously you need to have a huge funding source. If you're willing to say, these are things that we can do over 20 years versus 40 years, that again would determine what mechanism you would go for. I think at this point, discussions at our EVAC committee, which includes community leaders and our other political leaders, has basically said, look, we understand that probably we don't see a change coming at the federal level as far as an increase. And at the state level, while it's encouraging that you all are meeting here today and that you're going to come up with recommendations, regardless of what recommendation you make and what recommendation is then maybe enacted by the legislature, we believe we're still going to have some different challenges. Because like Eric has said, if you say, we're going to raise the gas tax, well, is it 5 cents? Is it 10 cents? Is it 15 cents? And then, how is that enacted? Do you index that over time? So regardless of what happens at the state level, we believe we're going to have some unique challenges being sort of the middle child. We're not as urbanized as Maricopa County and we're not rural, but we've got a lot of both and we have to address both. So that's why having those local options is so important to us. I probably didn't answer your question, but I used it as an opportunity to sort of hammer home what I wanted to say. So
That's okay.
Mr. Tully.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Los Santos, you mentioned the 2045 gap, which is a very, very large number. If you look at what's been deferred as far as maintenance and new roadways as of now, how large is that number now?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Tully, the gap for that we have up there, the 15.9, 15.2? I brought Nathan Barrett and Jamie Brown to help me with numbers because I sometimes, but that includes basically taking our existing roadways and getting them up to about an 80% level of performance. So that number includes getting them up there. But then beyond that, it's got that ongoing maintenance. So we've sort of tried to incorporate that into the plan, which is different than plans that we've done in the past, where we basically said, well, this is basically the amount of money you're going to need to do maintenance. And we sort of said, well, we'll take that off the top. This was the first plan because, again, we had such interest in the community to make sure that we're not only going to fix our roads, but then we're going to maintain them after we get them there. We sat down and we did an exercise that basically looked at how much it would cost to get up there, and then we took that amount and we sort of then decreased it from the total amount of the funding that was available, and that limited the amount of projects we were able then to deliver. Then once we did that, that left to one of the bigger shortfalls. And Jamie, did you have a much better answer than me? Oh, okay, thank you. And then Jamie handed me this. So the maintenance was about $3.1 billion.
I'm trying to get to a place where there's clearly a cost to society of having roadways that are not, that are not maintained. And you had a chart that basically showed red, yellow, green. Those roads are. I'm trying to assess right now, and we're in a situation right now in the area where we've deferred funding, whether it be new roads or whether it be maintaining roads. And I'm trying to understand, forgetting about new growth going forward to 2045, just how bad is the situation as of today? If we were to fix the problem today, it's not 15 billion. I assume it's a smaller number because you've looked at new roadways going in place over the next 25 years.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Tully, members of the task force, the number that we're using right now, which again is based on the numbers that we're getting from our jurisdiction, is around 800 million. Because as we are moving forward with our current RTA, there is discussions that if we moved forward with a second RTA, how much money would it be to then sort of get us up to that number? So that's about 800 million. But that being said, moving forward, we also have to identify what the number is to make sure that we maintain it. Because that's sort of the issue when you do things like use bonding to do road maintenance. The roads get so bad, people get so upset, they say, oh, well, I'm willing to vote for that bond. They get a limited time influx of cash, and it shows up on their property bill. Then the jurisdiction makes all the roads look pretty, but it's not sustainable. There's no funding source to keep it up. So then over time, what happens is the roads begin to deteriorate, and then the public then gets upset again, and then they're willing to then say, well, I'll vote for this to fix the problem. The problem with that is, because I know everybody wants transparency and wants the public to say, yes, you should always get to vote for what you want to vote for. But the problem with that is that they're paying a ton more based on reconstruction versus if they just maintained it. It's like your car. If you change your oil, it only costs you so much to operate every year. If you say, I'm going to save the $19 on the oil change, and your engine seizes up, all of a sudden then your annual maintenance fees is much higher. It's similar to that in that if you don't maintain your roadways, you let them crumble, it's going to cost you more. So that's sort of our challenge with the public education, is to make sure people understand that that is the cost, even though they may not necessarily see it, is necessary and good business to make sure you maintain those in the long term. And I would also take the opportunity to address a question from before, is what sort of the individual a person has to endure. I think it's Texas A&M has a sort of an index of how much it costs based on road conditions more to maintain your vehicle. In addition, there's another study that says how much money you're sort of losing stuck in traffic and congestion. They sort of take those hours of delay and they multiply it by the sort of the average hourly wage. Well, in Arizona, and I think they only do Phoenix and Pima County, and actually we have a great slide on that we didn't include here. We're both above the national average, and within Pima County anyway, if you look at the people who have tire damage, shock damage, suspension damage, all of those things, how much does that cost them versus what Eric had mentioned, the extra $5 a month? So there's a case to be made that says, actually, as much as you want to save people and say, well, if we raise taxes, it will hurt them, in some respects, not raising taxes, or at least not providing the revenue necessary to maintain our roadways, is already hurting them in that they're going to have to pay either in their time that they could be spending working or with their children, or in actual damage to their vehicle.
Just to clarify, you're preaching to the choir.
Yeah. Amen, brother.
Any other questions? Mr. McCarthy.
Sure. A note in the white paper to your comment about pay-as-you-go versus bonds, there's a reference to levy a property tax for transportation, Pima being the only county that doesn't. I'm not aware of a county that does, and I'm wondering if you, and there's a statutory reference, I just saw it, so I haven't had a chance to reference that, but is this a reference that predates the current regime? You can levy, any county can spend anything it wants on transportation, right, within the current framework of laws that limit how much they can tax in various areas, right? So I'm not aware of any provision that would allow for a 25-cent levy, right, in excess of those laws that currently apply. And again, off the top of my head, I can't think of a county that does that. Is this an old statute that predates the current constitutional limits that are on counties?
Mr. Chair, Mr. McCarthy, members of the task force, I believe the thought process there was kind of taking that whole argument of, well, we're going to bond and then we're going to pay it off with a property tax, and again, how that's inefficient. And the idea was then to smooth that over and use a secondary tax rate. And I thought in there that we had mentioned that might need to have some additional legislation, but Nathan, can you help me out and find that?
I believe the reference here is in the half-cent bill tax.
Oh, we're talking half cent. I thought we were talking property tax.
It's in the property tax section, the 286712 reference.
Page 9.
Yeah, and we don't need to debate it. It's
Oh, yeah,
probably something you'll want to look at again and that cleared up. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Will Daniel Rahm please approach the podium? Daniel is the Senior Legislative Liaison for the County Supervisors Association of Arizona.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. My name is Daniel Rahm, and I'm the Senior Legislative Liaison at the County Supervisors Association. Thank you all for having me here today. CSA is very supportive of this task force, and we want to thank Senator Worsley for bringing us all together here with his legislation. CSA is a nonpartisan forum for all of Arizona's 61 county supervisors. All 61 of them do sit on our board, representing all 15 counties. We provide a mechanism to share important issues facing local constituents, share information, and advance a proactive agenda. And our goal is to promote efficient, responsive constituent services and develop and disseminate information to a state and local decision-making. So why is CSA here today? Counties in Arizona maintain over 20,000 miles of road. We maintain about a third of the total miles of public road in the state. We also maintain some of the American Indian Reservation and National Forest roads with agreements from the landowners. The needs among counties differ and are very dependent upon several factors, one being population, the other being area of the county, physical characteristics of the county like climate, terrain, it varies as you go to the northern part of the state to the southern part of the state, and the extent and the condition of the current roadway system. Going back to population, it's interesting to note that in Pima County, around 350,000 people live in the unincorporated area. And putting that into perspective, that would make unincorporated Pima County the fourth largest city in the state. So challenges that we face, while counties' needs are different and vary throughout the state, all 15 counties have identified the current road and highway conditions as one of their primary concerns in the state. And the biggest obstacles we face are a lack of sufficient funding, diversion of resources, and an increase to the cost of materials. In 2013, our board unanimously adopted a resolution stating that we need to do something to increase revenue in our state for transportation needs. And while no specific policy idea was brought forth, we did recommend or suggest several options, everything from the gas tax, user fees on hybrids for electric cars. We also passed a resolution in 2015 similar to that, and I think you all should have a copy of that with you. So definitely our board and our 61 members, the county supervisors, have identified that something definitely needs to be done. HERF. Many county transportation directors believe HERF really stands for Highways Under Real Fatigue. And those of you who live outside of Maricopa County or have traveled outside of Maricopa County fully understand how truly bad our road conditions are. HERF is our bread and butter. Without it, we can't really pay for road improvements. Counties are very limited in terms of what we can do in our ability to raise taxes by the state. And in most counties, asking for a raise in the sales tax is a very heavy lift to ask, especially in some of the smaller counties and in rural Arizona. Therefore, HERF is where most of our counties' budgets, highway budgets, are derived from. 90% goes to counties, and it's distributed based on a portion of gas distribution, diesel fuel consumption, and a portion of unincorporated population. We've heard a lot about the gas tax in Arizona, that how it's remained consistent since the 1990s. While gas prices have gone up, the state population has increased by 80%, and more fuel-efficient vehicles have combined to lower per capita fuel consumption, limiting our ability to pay for basic roads and highway construction maintenance. Factoring in inflation, improved gas mileage, the gas tax is actually less than half of what it was in 1960 at its peak. Last year, the legislature gratefully allocated $9.97 million and a one-time funding for HERF distribution to the counties. This was certainly a relief to us. However, moving forward, we're actually still quite concerned. Since 2005, $182.19 million has been redirected out of HERF distribution to the counties, which has been extremely troubling. Putting things into perspective, and I've listed Graham County's numbers on the right, but it will take 9 years to get back to the 2006 levels, which is essentially a 20-year gap between 2006 and 2025. The cost of road maintenance has also gone up, which has forced counties to make several sacrifices. We're not just talking about pavement improvements. We're also talking about for gravel and dirt roads. The costs for repairing and fixing those have also gone up over the last 10 years significantly. The effects of inflation on the cost of materials has also had an impact and virtually have made it impossible to keep up with the demands due to the lack of HERF funds as well. Instead of resurfacing, counties are often using chip seal as a less expensive way to repair the damages. However, you can see from this chart the cost of the materials has significantly increased from 2003, where 1 mile of chip seal would be around $4 million, and today it's at least triple the cost for 1 mile of chip seal. And where $500,000 got you back in 2003 was 118 miles of road fixes for chip seal. Today, $500,000 gets you about 40 miles. Counties are having to make significant sacrifices. Mojave County is facing a transportation shortfall currently of about $10 million. That number, it's kind of hard to see on this chart. That I said 14, but currently it's 10. The shortfall is requiring counties to make various sacrifices in terms of how they handle road construction. Mojave, for example, is providing weatherproof chip seal to all paved roads every 25 years, which is 5 times the best practice cycle. They're also executing a capital pavement preservation program for highway pavement rehabilitation and a 33-plus year cycle, which is actually 2 times the best cycle practice. Delayed maintenance costs of counties. Maintaining and improving key transportation corridors is not only essential to the counties, but it's important to the economic growth of the entire state and plays a key role in international freight movements as well as supporting Arizona's ecotourism sector. Diversion of maintenance to county funds places a higher reliance on federal funds for reconstruction of failing roads. And additionally, you've probably all seen this pavement deterioration chart in the past. I know it's been talked about in the past. And on the side, you notice it says payment, P-A-Y. And the reason why I put that there was not a typo is because when it comes to payment, you're either paying now or paying later. So $1 spent in early life of payment saves $4 to $5 in the long run. So making that investment early on, you could see if you don't, the drop-off is significant in the deterioration to the roads. Now, in terms of resolutions, we unfortunately don't have all the answers. As Mr. Rounds said last committee hearing, if the solutions were easy, they would have been implemented by now. However, what we want to see is an end to the diversion of dedicated transportation funds like HERF. There is no one specific solution that we have identified. We do encourage this task force to consider a mix of several options, whether it be the gas tax, user fees on hybrids, etc. We do believe that DPS should be funded. However, we do have concerns when that money is diverted from HERF and where that money would go to the counties. It's also important that we identify deficiencies in our current and existing systems and work with federal and state agencies to streamline the grant process so we can effectively get some of those federal funds and use them at the local level. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Will Supervisor Babbitt please come to the podium? Mr. Babbitt is Coconino County Supervisor as well as the Executive Board Chair of the Flagstaff Metropolitan Planning Organization.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the task force. Real pleasure to be here and appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts with you on your mission and our mission, as I think they intersect nicely. My name is Art Babbitt. I'm the current chair of the Flagstaff Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm also the chair of the Northern Arizona Intergovernmental Public Transportation Authority, NAPTA, and I am a supervisor for Coconino County in District 1. Ms. Neff, did the resolution get distributed to everyone? Great, thank you very, very much. Just a little bit briefly about who we are, and at the FMPO, Flagstaff Metropolitan Planning Organization, our members include the City of Flagstaff with representation from the mayor and council members, another colleague of mine from the Board of Supervisors, and I sit on the elected side, as well as productive relationships with ADOT and NAPTA, the Public Transportation Authority. We serve approximately 90,000 people in a radius of 525 or so square miles around Flagstaff, which includes all of the city limits of Flagstaff, as well as unincorporated communities in the county outside the city. As a rule, I think one of the great opportunities from my perspective that I have is to share with you the story of rural Arizona and transportation, the importance of transportation, systemic approaches to transportation infrastructure and connectivity that rural Arizona has. At the FMPO, we've been very supportive of looking at a suite of options in terms of fiscal strategies which meets our transportation objectives. And that plays out not just in the FMPO, and Ms. Pastrick, I think, will recognize some of this as familiar. It speaks to how we work collaboratively with partners, not only in Coconino County, but within our region. I'm part of a larger working group that includes the Central Yavapai MPO, as well as NACOG, that is trying to generate momentum and support and encouragement for the work that you are engaged with, that Senator Worsley put on the table, and I think that's very important to recognize that work, that allows us to have important and frank discussions about strategies towards fiscal sustainability of a system-wide approach to our transportation infrastructure. An indication of how that community conversation has gone in Coconino County and in Flagstaff, I think, is pretty indicated by some of the results of some of our sales tax initiatives that we've brought to the voters over the last decade. The most recent was 2 years ago when both the city and the county passed sales tax initiatives to fund the primarily maintenance of our existing infrastructure to be able to maintain what we have. I think, as we all know, one of the interesting and at times troubling changes in how we bond and allocate resources is we have gone from a new capital, philosophical approach to an O&M approach. And there are some very important ramifications for long-term viability of our infrastructure with that change. But it's been subtle, but it's been very important. We have a Prop 411 is coming, which relates to a renewal of the sales tax for the public transportation infrastructure. We have, I think, good consensus from both our public and private sector partners, as well as our communities, on what our core transportation principles should be. They should be based on connectivity. They should be based on a systems-wide approach. And fundamentally, they should be based on the reasonable expectations that citizens should expect us to put a transportation system that is transparent to them. They don't need to understand when they are leaving a county road to a city road to a state road, so long as that road and infrastructure is safe, is reasonably maintained, and done so in a thoughtful and fiscally prudent way. I think that's part of why we've had great success and had initiatives, sales tax initiatives that pass at the 60, 65 and above percentage rate in our communities. I think that value proposition is there. I think you've heard it from a lot of folks today, and that's certainly one of the things that we do as electeds. I'll speak for myself. I do is to try to put the value proposition out and understand that it should be transparent when they cross these jurisdictions. So my point on that is we have done a lot of work locally. Now we are at an important stage where we're talking about not just local roads, but we're talking about state routes, states highways, and then interstates. And this is where that importance of a transparent and connected network really comes into play. I think it's, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. The state route system and interstate is the economic lifeline of rural Arizona. It is the economic lifeline of Flagstaff. It is the economic lifeline of our communities. And people understand that if we need outcomes, or if we want outcomes associated with a transportation system that actually supports strong regional economies, supports communities, safe routes to school, we have to have fiscal strategies that enable and engender those outcomes. So with that said, in front of you, you have a resolution that the board just passed that I think helps share our perspectives, but I also hope you look at it as a supportive and encouraging document, that this is an opportunity. This took a lot of momentum, a lot of effort. I've been in public service and elected office since early 2000s. And this has always, the HERF issue has been the number one or number two issue for the last, 15 years on at least whether it was City of Flagstaff or Coconino County. And so this is the opportunity. Many of us have worked hard, and I want to thank you for taking that opportunity. So we need to put everything on the table, and we need to be thoughtful and understanding that difficult outcomes, if we want to achieve them, are going to require a few difficult decisions. And so the specific strategies, I think, that we have come, and you've heard a very common theme here today, that we are supportive of in resolution format. I think our colleagues at CYMPO are going to have a resolution for you, if you don't already have it, and NACOG as well, is to look at that mix of short-term and long-term funding. I think the question about whether the gas tax is the right long-term mechanism is a great question. We believe it is a very appropriate short-term mechanism that can bridge until we get a vehicle miles traveled, thoughtful, parity-based fuel source assessment, user-based system. I really appreciated the comments that we have to return to a user fee-based system. Really want to encourage, and this came up earlier, us expanding the P3 opportunities. And if that, and in our resolution, we have explicitly called out tolling. Not because we are advocating that or not, but it's got to get put on the table as part of the discussion. And so that is included in our resolution for your reference. The state sales tax option, I think, is great because it does allow some relevancy and tether back to the price of fuel. Indexing is included here because, as we've seen in the inflationary reality over a 20, 30, 40-year window, the impacts are phenomenal. When we did our Prop 403 Transportation Ask, we had a graph that showed what the cost of asphalt emulsifier had done over the last 30 years. And I can tell you it's on a different bar scale than what the fuel tax has been to. Really appreciated the DPS discussion. It is integral to this discussion, to solving the puzzle to put this together. And, as one elected and as a representative of MPO, that should be part of this discussion. I think this is our opportunity to have a holistic discussion on that. And so you have the resolution. I think our work with other partner agencies like Central Yavapai and some of the other COGs are hoping to build consensus around the values and the strategies associated with the work that's in front of you. So with that, I just want to thank you for being part of a really important process that I'm sure, and I know many of you have worked on for a long time. I know I have worked on it on a different side of the room perhaps, and maybe not as important as some of the folks down here, but certainly trying to engage the communities, constituents, and on what an incredibly important economic development piece is, school route safety and viability of our community. So with that, I just want to thank you for your time, the opportunity, and I'm happy to take some questions if anyone has one.
Thank you, Supervisor. I'll start. Do you have any, or can you cite any examples of successful P3s that you've seen, and how that might apply to some of the things we're looking at?
So I think, interestingly, the city of Flagstaff is engaged with a P3 right now with ADOT. It is not on the it is on the facility side of ADOT, less on roads. So the answer is, on my jurisdictions, no. I do not have significant experience. What I can tell you is that from a qualitative perspective, if we want to achieve things, we have to have a strategy to make that happen, and we're going to have to make compromises. And so I understand that there are constituents who are, very reluctant about tolling out here, which may or may not be part of some P3s, but I think we have to put it on the table, because that is where we are going to have resources to achieve outcomes.
Other questions?
Mr. Chairman, Supervisor Babbitt, thanks for coming down here today. We appreciate it. And some of the things you've done in the region up there are pretty, I think, very good examples for the state. I mean, you recently passed 2 very successful sales tax increases for transportation. As you mentioned, they were for maintenance, and I think you have plans for some other things in the future, but both of those were widely supported by your communities, both at the county level, countywide, as well as in Flagstaff. And I think that's indicative of the importance of transportation to local people and local communities. So I think you're a good example for what can be done.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McGuire, appreciate that. There are ample opportunities to engage, the people we serve and the people who pay our taxes and our salaries on meaningful discussions on transportation.
Ms. Patrick.
Thank you, Supervisor Babbitt. I'm really happy that we were able to review this together as a panel, because it does synthesize work that's been ongoing for a very long time, for over a year, with many stakeholders. And one of the opportunities that is reflected in here is the private sector engagement as well. So when we talk about perhaps in some of the other presentations a property tax or a new sales tax or some of the opportunities we have seen this morning, I always wonder if the private sector has been very significantly engaged, because some of these opportunities end up being regressive or recessive, because the business community knows that there's a certain cap to what fees and regulations that they can absorb. So this particular plan I have a great interest in, but I wondered, so for example, may I ask a question on one of the items?
Absolutely.
So I know that in northern Arizona and in rural Arizona, the number of miles driven is very different than down here. But then again, when you have someone in the West Valley, perhaps living in further than the middle central Phoenix, working in maybe the East Valley, it does definitely add up. So on the third bullet on the Executive Board recommendations, enact a VMT fee system and include alternative fuel vehicles. In Coconino County, can you describe how far the distance is right now for commuters to get to their places of employment, and how that would impact them? And what kind of the thought process was there? Because I know rural sometimes experiences longer distances.
Yeah, and I think the question is a good question, Mr. Chair and Ms. Patrick, and an important one, especially when, I probably don't need to tell you this, but we live in the second largest county in the United States, and from corner to corner is, 5.5 hours if you want to go around that little ditch that we have to go around up there. We have, significant members of tribal communities that cannot afford to live in Flagstaff and commute in. So I think that we probably have, relative to our population, actually, and our density, I think we probably have quite high vehicle miles traveled for many of those outlying communities to come in. The list is not meant to be prioritized in any way or meant to be exhaustive. It is hopefully meant to be a supportive document to let you know there are both electeds and organizations who want you and are encouraging you to put everything on the table. None of these are going to be pain-free. None of them are going to be pain-free. It's been my experience. I've never had a tough decision that did not have unintended consequences to it. But I do want to reference, too, as well, I think. So the answer is no quantitative assessment has been done as far as I know. It is something that, as we talked about tolerance with 10% tax rates, for example, which the city and county were very cognizant of wanting to stay under that 10% when we added our third of a cent sales, a little bit less than third of a cent sales tax. There's a tolerance. There's absolutely a tolerance, and whether it comes at the individual budgetary pocketbook level of someone saying at the end of the year, this is my VMT hit, or a tax rate, I think if we don't understand that those are important tolerances, we're gonna not hit the runway correctly.
Thank you. And in addition, I heard from other counties and or presenters as well that whatever we're considering and whatever we're looking at, we're talking about being very clear about the outcomes of that investment. And Mr. Anderson in the MAG made that comment very clearly too, that as long as the people that are going to be affected and the voters, if you will, would understand that with this type of an investment, this is how our quality of life in this community can be maintained, sustained, or enhanced. Arizona consistently has a quality of life that we are very proud of. Flagstaff is consistently named one of the best places in America to live, one of the happiest places to live, whatever. And I firmly believe that if we all are pivoting from an economic development platform, which our governor is very bullish on, that the economy of our state is reliant, we all know, on these improvements. And if we keep in mind that the P3s and all of the partners involved should be able to agree these outcomes are essential, I think we're going to win. And we really appreciate that you're able to synthesize this, because this document is very large that accompanies all of these recommendations. So thank you for your time, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any additional questions? Thank you, Supervisor.
Really appreciate your work. Thank you.
I do not see anybody registered for public comment, public testimony, so I will open it up to anyone in the audience who would like to approach and speak. I'll just remind you that it has to be germane to the subject at hand, which is regional state funding and needs. With that, please introduce yourself and any organization you're representing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Chris Bridges. I'm the administrator for Central Yavapai MPO. I provided staff this morning a copy of the resolution similar to what Supervisor Babbitt just handed to you. I did want to emphasize that ours does also include P3s, including tolling. NACOG board is as well going to be considering a resolution along the same path. I did have a couple of things on a question that came up earlier about a specific P3 project. We don't have any in the Prescott region ourselves, but having met with Brian Townsend in the governor's office, one that he's looking at and that we're looking at for a possible Interstate 17 solution is the Denver to Boulder Highway. It was a 2-lane facility. They added a hot lane for tolling, so you got the additional capacity, and you also had the private sector come in on that as well. So with that, that's all I had to say, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. I open the, please.
My name is Walt Gray. I'm the coordinator of the West Side Town Hall program. I'm a former ADOT PIO. Was there during a large part of Mary Peters. In fact, just about all of her time with ADOT. I've worked with Eric Anderson at MAG and now I retired in 2002 and have been a community activist, particularly for the working poor and poor. I live in West Phoenix. I've lived in West Phoenix 35 years. I am active in the community, have been particularly active since retirement. Just a few comments, just kind of loose kind of comments, but pertaining to what was said today. And that is, when you're talking about the working poor and poor, which are sometimes not mentioned in these conversations, we're still looking for tax relief, not tax increases. Too much over the years in Arizona have been put on the backs of the working poor and poor, largely through the sales tax, and which is a regressive tax. And we pay a higher percentage of the cost from our incomes than the middle class and the wealthy. And not only is transportation funded by sales tax to a large degree in the state as you heard today in different regions, but also, the general operation of government, city government, state government, local, county government. So I think in the case of Phoenix, for example, when they raised for transportation 2050, they raised the sales tax 0.7%. But something to remember is that the city of Phoenix eliminated a 2% food tax. So we're still to the good with the city of Phoenix. And nobody, the working poor and poor have paid their fair share of taxes. They haven't complained. They've paid it all along and everything like that. And they will continue to do so, I believe. I'm not a elected person or anything like that, but I live in that community, and I'm now very close. I go into houses every week as a volunteer for a charity, and we think that the whole benefit, not just user fees, but those who benefit from highways and freeways should be participating. I think, as Mr. McGuire said, or asked anyway, do we talk about development fees and things like that for developers who benefit largely from these infrastructure developments? And are there other ways of the motor carriers? I'm not sure that if they're paying 26 cents rather than 18 cents, if that's sufficient. When I was at ADOT PIO, we used a figure that a truck, 18-wheeler, 80,000 pounds, does the same damage as 7,000 vehicles. I don't know, there's probably some current figure about that now. But there's things like that. And then also, transportation, I'm finding this very, very often in the Phoenix area where I'm mostly involved, and that is that it cannot be separated from economic development. Because if you separate transportation from economic development, then what you're doing, and if you just say, well, transportation will produce economic development, it's not balanced. It's just not balanced. And you need to look at targeted economic development, diverse targeted economic development throughout, say in our case, as one example, the Phoenix region, the MAG region. So I think by keeping jobs close to home, reduce the infrastructure costs And we don't just talk about infrastructure, but we talk about keeping jobs close to home and using those transportation facilities, not to separate people, because that's what we're doing. When we separate the middle class and the wealthy from the lower class through freeways and light rail. And then we rely on stereotypes, and then it all messes up. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Open it up to the committee members for any comments or further discussion on this topic. Good. So our announcements. The next task force meeting will be October 12th. The task force will take up a closer look into the dedicated incremental funding sources of HERF that are sufficient to meet the statewide needs of the statewide highway system and associated proportionate funding for local government recipients of the highway user funds based on statutory requirements. We heard a little bit more than a few comments today about HERF, and we look forward to a robust discussion on the 12th. Having no further business, the Surface Transportation Funding Task Force second meeting is adjourned.